Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to bring you another story from the amazing Philippines. We're talking about a teacher who executed hundreds of Japanese soldiers. She was the silent killer, how they would call her. This video comes from Joseph, who, again, thank you for the support on Patreon. Let's go and watch this. If you're new on the channel, a lot of history about the Philippines. But Nieves Fernandez, it's coming up next. If you didn't know about this, you'll learn together with me over here. Let's go and check this day.
Before World War II reached the Philippines, Fernandez lived a life that was hard but steady. The kind of life most people around her knew well. She was born around 1906 in the countryside of Leyte, an island where most people lived far from cities and depended on the land and the sea to survive. The Philippines at that time was still feeling the strong effects of colonial rule. Spain had controlled the islands for more than 300 years. And when Spain left in 1898, the United States took over. By the early 1900s, the country was officially under American control. But most ordinary Filipinos saw little improvement in their daily lives. Poverty was widespread, roads were poor, healthcare was limited, and many children never went to school at all. Life in Leyte revolved around farming rice, coconut harvesting, fishing, and small village trade. Families worked long hours just to eat. Money was scarce and hunger was common during bad seasons. Education was not free or easy to access, especially in rural areas. Many children had to work instead of studying. Girls were expected to help at home, marry early, and stay quiet. Very few women had jobs outside the household, and even fewer held positions of authority. Fernandez stood out because she became a primary school teacher, one of the few respectable professions open to educated women at the time. Teaching in rural Leyte was nothing like modern classrooms. Schools were often small wooden huts or borrowed spaces with no desks, no books, and sometimes no chalk. A single teacher might handle 30 to 50 children of different ages in one room. Teachers were paid very little, and often months late, if they were paid at all. Many survived by growing vegetables, raising chickens, or relying on help from villagers. Despite these hardships, teaching mattered deeply. For many children, school was the only place where life felt organized and hopeful. Fernandez taught basic reading, writing, and counting, but she also taught discipline and routine in a world full of uncertainty. People in her community respected her, not because she was powerful, but because she was dependable. She was known as someone who followed rules and expected others to do the same. There was no evidence that Fernandez was involved in politics or resistance before the war. She did not attend rallies, join secret groups, or speak openly against foreign rule. She had no military background and no training in violence. Like millions of Filipinos, she was simply trying to survive in a poor country with limited choices. She had no idea that the skills she learned to manage a classroom would later help her survive something far more dangerous. On December 8, 1941, it happened. Japanese warplanes attacked the Philippines just hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Major American air bases like Clark Field in Pampanga and Nicholas Field near Manila were hit hard, destroying aircraft on the ground before they could fight back. The attacks shocked the population. Many Filipinos had believed the islands were protected by the United States, and that war would not reach them so quickly. Within weeks, Japanese ground troops landed across the country. The Philippine Army, which lacked modern weapons and training, was unable to stop them. American and Filipino forces were forced to retreat toward the Bataan Peninsula.
I'm going to say only this really quick. I have on the channel as well the Battle of Manila. I'm going to leave it at the end of the video where the Japanese committed atrocities like I don't even want to think about it. But man, the original link is down below of this video. It's really well done. So thank you for this. It's a story. And thinking about, the system and how hard it was. Think about today. If you're lucky enough to go to school to have all the things you have, I am grateful. It was crazy. What these people from that time had to endure,
Corregidor Island. leaving much of the countryside undefended. Civilians were suddenly face to face with an invading army. By early 1942, Japanese troops had entered Leyte. At first, they told villagers they were there to free Asia from Western control. Posters, speeches, and orders spoke of unity and cooperation. But the reality became clear very quickly. Japanese soldiers took rice, livestock, and tools without payment. Radios were banned because they could receive foreign news. Curfews were enforced. And anyone caught outside after dark risked arrest or worse. People were beaten for small reasons. Suspected resistance helpers were tortured for information. Executions were carried out in public spaces to scare entire villages into obedience. Schools were among the first institutions to be affected. Many were shut down entirely, while others were taken over for military use. Teachers lost their jobs overnight. Worse, educated people became targets. Anyone who could read, write, or organize others was seen as a possible threat. They were questioned, arrested, or killed simply because they were educated. During this period, Fernandez suffered a personal loss that changed her life. While records do not clearly state who was killed, multiple accounts agree that someone close to her died violently at the hands of Japanese forces. The killing was not private or accidental. It was part of the occupation's brutality. For Fernandez, this was the moment when fear turned into something else. The
Into
careful,
anger.
rule-following teacher realized that obedience offered no safety. From that point on, survival alone was no longer enough. By mid-1942, small resistance groups had begun forming across the island. These groups were not created by orders from above. They formed naturally as more people realized that open obedience would not protect them. Leyte was well suited for this kind of resistance. Much of the island was covered in thick jungle, steep hills, rivers, and swampy ground. Roads were few, narrow, and often muddy. Japanese soldiers who were trained for open battle struggled to move and patrol in these conditions, especially away from towns. Many of the early guerrillas were former members of the Philippine Army who had escaped capture after the collapse of organized resistance in 1942. Others were farmer, fishermen, laborers, and teachers who refused to accept occupation. These groups had almost nothing in terms of equipment. Most had no radios to contact other units. They had no uniforms, which made it easy to blend in, but hard to organize. There was no steady support from outside the island, especially in the early years of the occupation. Daily survival was as important as fighting. Guerrillas depended on villagers for food, shelter, and information. In return, they tried to protect communities from Japanese abuse when they could. This created a quiet but strong bond between fighters and civilians. If the guerrillas failed, the villages suffered. If the villages betrayed them, the guerrillas died. Fernandez entered this dangerous world slowly and carefully. As a former schoolteacher, she did not stand out as a threat. At first, her role was support rather than combat. She carried food through forest paths, passed messages between units, and gathered information. Because she was known and trusted, she could move between villages without raising immediate suspicion. She paid close attention to how Japanese patrols behaved, which officers were harsh, and which locals cooperated out of fear. Listening and observing became her first weapons. As the occupation grew harsher, conditions worsened for everyone. Japanese patrols became more frequent and aggressive, especially in areas suspected of helping guerrillas. Food shortages became severe as crops were seized or destroyed. Informers appeared in villages, often people trying to protect their own families. The risk of betrayal was constant. Guerrilla groups began to realize that loud attacks and gunfire only brought deadly reprisals. What they
So you
needed
have to be
were
silent.
fighters who could operate quietly and leave no evidence behind. It was under these conditions that Fernandez moved beyond support work. During that time, guns were a rare and dangerous luxury among guerrillas in Leyte. Ammunition was nearly impossible to replace, and firing a weapon often meant exposing one's position. Captured rifles were hidden and used only when absolutely necessary. Most close combat relied on simple tools that people already owned: knives, farm tools, wooden clubs, and homemade traps became the weapons of choice. Fernandez chose the bolo, a large blade commonly used by farmers to clear land and harvest crops. It was heavy, sharp, and familiar. Unlike a gun, it made no sound and required no ammunition. Using it effectively required patience and nerve. She did not receive formal training. Instead, she learned through careful observation and repeated practice. She watched how Japanese soldiers moved when they were alert and how they behaved when they felt safe. She noticed when guards became careless, when patrols spread out,
do you imagine the courage?
and when individuals walked alone. She understood that survival depended on strict control. Every movement had to be planned. Every attack needed a clear escape path. There could be no hesitation and no mistakes. Her focus was not on bravery, but on certainty. She attacked only when she knew she could succeed and disappear without leaving signs behind. She favored locations where the environment worked in her favor. Narrow jungle trails forced soldiers to walk one behind the other. River crossings slowed them down and limited their vision. Tall grass and thick trees provided cover. These places allowed her to strike quickly and vanish before others could react. Over time, Japanese units operating in these areas began reporting strange losses. Soldiers disappeared while carrying messages. Supply runners failed to return to camp.
She was like a
Small
ninja.
patrols went missing without any gunfire or witnesses. The uncertainty was worse than open battle. Fear spread among the troops because the threat could not be seen or predicted. No one knew where the next attack would come from, only that it could happen at any time. Without intending to, Fernandez had become a symbol of silent resistance, and the occupation forces were beginning to feel it. By the end of 1942, she was no longer moving alone through the forests of Leyte. The pressure of constant danger had forced guerrilla groups to organize more carefully, and her experience made her someone others trusted. She gathered a small unit that operated deep in the island's interior, far from roads and towns. Most accounts placed the size of her group at 10 to 15 fighters, mostly adult men who had either escaped capture earlier in the war or had joined the resistance after seeing Japanese abuses firsthand. They accepted her leadership not because of her gender or background, but because she had proven she could plan attacks and bring people back alive. Fernandez did not behave like a traditional military commander. She did not give long talks or appeal to politics. Her leadership was practical and focused on survival. She planned moves carefully, choosing paths that avoided villages when patrols were nearby, and using the terrain to stay hidden. She insisted on discipline because mistakes could cost lives. Her fighters learned to rest when possible, move quietly, and avoid attention. Violence was never used for revenge or pride. Every attack had a clear purpose, such as breaking supply routes, removing dangerous patrol leaders, or creating
how
confusion
intelligent
among
also.
occupying forces. Rather than seeking direct confrontation, her unit focused on weakening Japanese control, bit by bit. They avoided open fights that would bring heavy retaliation. Instead, they targeted moments when small groups of soldiers were isolated or careless. This approach reduced risk and allowed the group to stay active for long periods, which was rare for guerrilla units operating without outside support. Japanese commanders reacted by tightening control over the civilian population. Villages near suspected guerrilla areas were questioned repeatedly. Men were tied up and interrogated. People accused of helping fighters were beaten, imprisoned, or killed in front of others as a warning. These actions caused deep fear and suffering, but they also had an effect that the occupiers did not expect. Instead of turning villagers against the resistance, the cruelty pushed more people to support it. Local families began working quietly with Fernandez and her fighters. Farmers warned them when patrols were coming. Fishermen shared information gathered along the coast. Villagers hid fighters in barns, forests, and abandoned huts. Food was scarce, yet people shared rice, root crops, and dried fish because they believed the guerrillas were their only protection. This quiet cooperation created a network that allowed the resistance to survive despite constant danger. And the war continued into 1943. Stories about Fernandez began spreading beyond Leyte. Guerrilla networks shared accounts of her attacks, and American intelligence officers operating secretly in the Philippines collected these reports. Some later claimed she had killed hundreds of Japanese soldiers. That number became widely repeated, especially after the war, but it cannot be proven. Japanese military records from Leyte were damaged or destroyed, and guerrilla fighting did not allow for careful counting of casualties. What can be confirmed is that her actions caused real disruption over several years. Japanese patrol routes changed. Soldiers moved in larger groups, which slowed operations and stretched manpower. Fear affected morale, especially in areas where her unit was active. Her reputation was not built on a single dramatic event, but on steady pressure.
Guys, I don't know if you knew about this story. Maybe some of you did, or some of you don't. I think she, as a lot of other Filipinos, should be national heroes. The courage and what she did, I don't know. Maybe some, the narrator said somebody close to her was killed, or she just want to make a stand for the country. And then looking nowadays at Filipino people, how resilient and how strong they are, and it doesn't matter what kind of hard things they are facing, they are still smiling. So that's why Filipino people are special, and I'm going to continue saying that. That's why, my channel is dedicated to this, guys, because it's something outstanding. Look at this story. I mean, for me, it's goosebumps, and it makes me feel proud, even if I'm not a Filipino. I'm a little Filipino by heart, but it's beautiful.
She survived long enough to carry out repeated attacks, adapt to changing conditions, and remain active until Japanese control collapsed. The legend grew because her story was easy to remember. A small, poorly equipped woman using a simple blade to fight a powerful army captured people's imagination. While the exact numbers may be exaggerated, the meaning behind them is not. Her impact was real, and her presence forced the occupiers to treat the countryside of Leyte as hostile territory rather than a conquered one. On October 20th, 1944, after nearly 3 years of brutal occupation, American forces finally landed on the beaches of Leyte, led by General Douglas MacArthur, who had famously promised to return after being forced to leave the Philippines in 1942. His landing marked the beginning of the end for Japanese control of the country. Thousands of American troops came ashore, supported by tanks, aircraft, and naval firepower that the guerrillas had never seen before. What followed was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought between October 23rd and 26th that same year. It became the largest naval battle in human history, involving more than 300 ships from both sides. The Japanese Navy suffered catastrophic losses. Several of its major warships were sunk, and many trained pilots were killed. After this battle, Japan could no longer properly supply or protect its forces in the Philippines. Food, ammunition, and fuel stopped arriving. Japanese soldiers on land were left isolated, hungry, and increasingly desperate. As American forces pushed inland, guerrilla units across Leyte came out of hiding to support them. Years of quiet resistance suddenly turned into open cooperation. Guerrillas provided maps drawn from memory, warned troops about ambush sites, and guided soldiers through jungle paths that did not appear on any map. Their local knowledge saved time and lives. They also attacked Japanese units that were retreating or trying to escape into the interior. Fernandez and her fighters took part in these efforts. They helped identify enemy positions and guided American soldiers through difficult terrain. The forests and hills she had survived in for years now became an advantage for the advancing forces. Japanese units that once terrorized villages were now fleeing, wounded, or surrendering. The balance of power had completely shifted. By December 1944, organized Japanese resistance on Leyte had collapsed. Some soldiers tried to hide in the jungle, but most were either killed, captured, or cut off with no hope of support. For Fernandez, the occupation that had destroyed her former life was finally over. The fear, hunger, and constant danger that defined her daily existence for nearly 3 years came to an end. After Leyte was liberated, she briefly stepped into the public eye. An American officer, impressed by her story and reputation, arranged for her to be photographed, which was published in 1945 and quickly spread through U.S. military publications and newspapers. For many readers, it became a powerful symbol of civilian resistance and the role ordinary Filipinos played in defeating the occupation. Despite this attention, the recognition stopped there. Like most guerrilla fighters, Fernandez did not receive a pension, land, or long-term support.
Come on!
The Philippine government faced massive problems after the war. Cities were destroyed, farms were ruined, and millions of people were homeless. Resources were limited, and priority was given to rebuilding infrastructure and restoring basic services. Guerrillas who had fought without formal enlistment were often left out of official programs. Fernandez returned to civilian life with nothing more than she had before the war, and in many ways, even less. She did not use her fame to seek money or status. She avoided interviews and public events. The world moved on, and so did she, carrying her experience with her, but refusing to turn them into spectacle. She died in 1976 at about 70 years old, after spending most of her post-war life in poverty. There were no state honors, no large funeral, and no public memorial when she passed away. Outside of a small number of historians and veterans, very few people in the Philippines or abroad knew her name at the time. Like many former guerrillas, she faded quietly into the background of a country focused on rebuilding and moving forward after years of destruction. The lack of recognition at her death was not unusual. After World War II, the Philippines struggled with massive problems. Entire cities were in ruins, including Manila, which was one of the most heavily damaged capitals of the war. Millions of people were displaced. Food shortages continued, and the economy was shattered. In this environment, many civilian fighters who had taken great risks during the occupation were overlooked, especially those who had never been formally enlisted in the military. Female guerrillas in particular were often ignored in official records. Over time, however, Fernandez's story did not disappear. As historians began studying local resistance movements more closely, her name reappeared in documents, photographs, and survivor accounts. Writers and educators used her life to explain how guerrilla warfare in the Philippines depended on ordinary people rather than professional soldiers. Her story helped challenge the idea that war is only shaped by generals and armies. It showed how individuals with no power or resources could still make a difference through determination and local knowledge.
That was amazing, guys. I'm so sorry that she didn't get anything of it. Just to have a better life, when she was getting older. But yeah, in a part I understand that the government had to rebuild, but at the same time, Lapu-Lapu has a statue, for God's sakes. I don't mean a statue, but just a medal or something. Anyways, I hope we can keep her memory alive by doing this kind of videos and share it with the world, because it was something amazing. She really did a difference, and she proved that the Filipino heart and courage, it's something that you don't buy, or you're not learned. You're just born with it. And yeah. Okay, let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think we should see next on the channel, and your thoughts about the video? You knew about this story, you didn't. We had actual footage, and that photo, man, it's something really, really outstanding. Hope you enjoy it. A lot of other video coming up on the channel, so make sure to subscribe if you like what you're seeing. And God bless the Philippines. Stay safe.